Welcome, Elsie Mokoena, to Dr. M at Coffee Time. This is such an honor to have you here. And the reason for me inviting you is because these are questions that people ask all the time in my sessions regarding, what the marital regimes are, the blended family, what should we do next, which ones to use if we get married again. And there are even some couples that are married that want to know, can I change my marital regime? Because my husband has created a lot of debt. So I either have to divorce to get out of this debt because I'm so concerned. What will be the other options? They don't want to divorce, but the accumulation of debt, especially if you have a husband that is detached from you and is not, engaged in the marriage and present in the marriage. They marry in community property and they do debts without sharing. And I have found that some women, after the man has died, they would see 3 cars in the yard and think, he's got all that money, and find out that they don't have money for the children for university. And often women would come and say, I want to get out of this marriage. He's not sharing his debt. I know he's making a lot of debt, but I don't want to divorce. So we are going to talk a little bit about all the regimes. Give it to me in detail and what are the advantages and disadvantages and also the consequences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saunders, for having me. I'm humbled and I'm honored to be here. I consider it a privilege, so thank you very much. All right, so let us start with marital regimes. There are 3 marital regimes in South Africa.
Can you please tell the people who you are and your background before you start?
All right.
Yes.
All right, sorry. I'm Elsie Mokoena, as Dr. Saunders has said. I'm a commercial and a family law practitioner and an accredited family law mediator. Aside from the commercial aspects, a considerable part of my practice focuses on child law, focuses on maintenance issues, divorces, general legal advice pertaining to marriages and various family law issues in that regard. I am, on a personal level, I am married to Mr. Timothy Mokoena. We have 2 children. We have a 19-year-old and a 10-year-old. I myself am in a blended family. I was divorced about 15 years ago. So I bring into my present marriage 1 child, and my daughter is 10 years old. So not only is it a blended family, but we are also an interracial and an intercultural family. My husband and I are both of the Christian faith, and our children as well. And in my spare time, I enjoy cooking for my family. I am Indian, and I also enjoy taking long walks and reading. I appear in the High Court. I appear in various magistrates' courts and family law related issues. And I'm also honored and humbled to say that I have had the experience of sitting as an acting family judge in the Johannesburg High Court Family Court.
Thank you so much. Wealth of experience and wealth of knowledge. So I can actually just be quiet for a while and allow you to speak. Go for it.
All right, so we're going to start with the 3 marital regimes. In South Africa, there are 3 marital regimes. You have marriages in community of property. You have marriages out of community of property, excluding the accrual system, and I will explain what that is shortly. And you have marriages with an antenuptial contract. Again, it's an out of community of property marriage, but with an accrual system. What a marriage in community of property is, it's a marriage where both parties come into a marriage and they basically become liable for each other's. It becomes a joint estate upon marriage, and that means whatever assets or liabilities either of the spouse had before marriage, it gets lump summed into the marriage in community of property. and whatever the parties acquire for the duration of their marriage in community of property, both have an equitable share in it, so to speak. So that is the first regime. It is the most cost effective, it is the most common, and it is the cheapest regime. The second type of marital regime we have in South Africa are marriages in community of property with accrual. We'll speak to with accrual. What does this entail? Parties need to conclude an antenuptial contract before they actually get married. This can be done as close as to 1 or 2 days, for instance, before they marry. But it has to be concluded before the marriage. And secondly, it must be registered within 3 months of it being concluded with the deeds office. Usually an attorney who's a notary would complete an ANC with the parties. They all would sign, and it needs to be registered within 3 months. But as I'm saying, the contract itself can be concluded within up to a day or two before the marriage itself. What does this type of marital regime entail? So basically, parties would regulate their proprietary aspects. They would regulate their values in terms of assets and things like that in the contract. And they will also stipulate what is the value that they're coming into the marriage. And this is very important for purposes of determining how the parties' estates have accrued with the accrual, and how the party, in the event there is a divorce, what are the values of the parties' estates. And so what a marriage out of community of property with the accrual entails, it basically means that parties, so all the debts, all the liabilities, pretty much all the liabilities that they had before their marriage stays their own. But there's also, even after they marry, each party still retains that independence. They are able to contract independently. If one of the spouses becomes insolvent, for instance, it does not affect the other spouse. Each of them have the ability to contract, and meaning even if they incur debts, they are liable for their own debts. But the advantage to a marriage of this, accrual as an accumulation, is that they do share somewhat similarly to a marriage in community or property, and as far as the growth of their respective estates is concerned. So that is one of the advantages of a marriage in community or out of community or property with the accrual. Then you have your marriage out of community of property, excluding the accrual, which basically means excluding community of property, excluding profit and losses, which means each party's assets and liabilities will basically stay theirs before the marriage. It stays there after the marriage. There are no proprietary consequences. That's the effect of the marriage system. It doesn't always play out like that in court, but perhaps when I speak to advantages and disadvantages, I will make mention. But that is in essence, what is yours is yours. Debts, assets, liabilities remains yours. Even if you become insolvent, it does not affect my estate, and vice versa. So that in a nutshell, or in summary, is our 3 marital regimes and what it entails. I must also say that customary marriages have the effect. Customary marriages are regulated by the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, and they have the force and effect of a community of property marriage.
They don't have choice.
Yes, unless they concluded an ANC before they conclude their customary marriages and all the precepts of a customary marriage, it is akin to a marriage in community of property. So that, in a nutshell, is our three marital regimes in South Africa?
Like I mentioned, the two that I find has been very complicated. The one is that I found in my practice is that in community of property. So when people have a relationship that is negotiable, a relationship where they share the information, their finances, where they share responsibilities, that kind of relationship works well within community of property. But the problem is, I have found that when there's a husband that's detached from the wife and the children, and he got married on paper but is really not married, individualistic, I will call them, and they will come and go as they please. They will have their bills. They will say, okay, how much do you need for the expenses? They will pay the expenses and keep the money, whatever they do, and the contracts that they do, they don't share it with their wife. I don't know how that works, because when I need to buy a car for myself, I need to call they call my husband. But when my husband buys a car, they don't call me. I don't know how that works. But anyway, leave that for now. The women are very concerned with in community of property when the husband doesn't share the contracts and share the financial obligations, that they're going to be abandoned one day with so much debt that they can't afford. And it has happened before with grieving. The loss is more severe when it comes to the finances that wasn't managed well. So the wife is still sitting with kids with high school, they need to go to university, and thinking that her husband's got everything in order. He is more in debt than he actually has liquid capital. And that is when they feel, now my kids don't even have money for, and it's devastating. That's the thing about in community of property. People need to, it's important that they do share with each other the debts that are occurring, because they are going to, the one is going to be responsible. If the one loses a job, she needs to know what, before you make a decision that you want to resign, what are your debts? Have you shared everything with me? If you don't, she's going to sit, or he is going to sit, with a huge amount of financial burden, which is so unfair. That's the one thing. The one with without, but with accrual, no. The one is without and without accrual. That one where everything stays yours, the debt stays yours, even if you're married, what I do is mine, what you do is yours. The risk is that I found that women at times at 40 years and older are now looking at retirement. And they found, you know what, he pays all his bonds of all his houses. I'm plowing similarly 20, 30,000 into fixing houses, fixing the house that they're living in, the school's fees. But what am I going to sit with one day? And when they ask the husband, like, are you going to include me in your will? So, but your children will get it and they will look after you. So that is something that makes women feel it's early. I need to jump ship so that I have 20 years to recover. So if you're going to do, income out of community of property without accrual, it is very important that you put those things in place, because women are very insecure about their future. And the amount of that they have to put in, and they're going to sit with nothing, or he gets married to someone else and he still sits with nothing. It's very risky, unless both have got enough money and they both really don't need each other's money, then that is fine. But when you marry someone who is financially dependent on you or earning much less than you, that will become risky in terms of women are saying, then I need to go and buy myself my own little 2-bedroom apartment, and I know that is when I retire, and go and live there and save my money, because he's got all the money and I can't see, I don't even know if I'm going to be in his future. That is sort of what the two concerns are. What do you find, Elsie?
All right, let's look at the first one when it comes to the marriages in community of property. It's so interesting that you've said that, Dr. Saunders, because we find so often when it comes to a divorce in a marriage of community of property, then it is at this point in time that spouses now want to count for every rand. They want to account for every cent. And it's often during this time one or the other's spending habits becomes exposed. One of the spouses now realizes And it's applicable to both men and women. You find that there's all of these debt that they've encumbered the joint estate without the other spouse actually being aware of it. And when it comes to now divorcing, and as I mentioned initially, one of the consequences of a marriage in community of property is that parties become jointly liable. And they share equitably. Of course, there are some legal exceptions, but they share pretty much equitably in the debts and in the assets of the joint estate. So that is a very, very common problem that usually, largely gets or comes out into the open or gets exposed when parties are going through a divorce. Um, the one of the one of the consequences of being married in community of property is that both parties are contract managers of their joint estate. So the law does permit them, under certain circumstances, to contract concerning this joint estate as a manager of that joint estate. So the spouse's permission is not always needed. For example, they can take out certain types of loans, they can purchase a motor vehicle, but they can't encumber or they can't alienate immovable property, for instance. That is going to require both spouses' permission. So I think, you'd find that to the extent one of them can, take out loans or contract to the extent allowed by law, they obviously have gone on to abuse this without informing the other spouse. And it's quite interesting because couples in community of property, I often find from a large number of divorces that I do, they only seem to be mindful when they are divorcing that they married in community of property. Yet, as you have so aptly said, for the duration of the marriage, often, they run their finances independently. The husband doesn't engage the wife. Unfortunately, we find that more with the without being gender biased, but I do find that happens more with the husbands. The wife comes during the time of divorce. The wife just usually comes to know that there's so much of debt, and now the joint estate becomes so prejudiced, and she now has to share in all of this, when it comes to a divorce. But yet, spouses, I'm going to refer to them collectively now, don't often conduct themselves in that manner. And it's so important that they do that. They have access to each other's banking accounts, they have access to each other's financial information. Even if one spouse takes on a loan or purchases a car, the other spouse should know, what is the value of that? What is the outstanding amount? What is owing? Why? Because it also affects their finances jointly. It affects the finances jointly. And if it's not managed properly, as you also so aptly said, when there's children, the children bear the brunt of this. They bear the brunt of their parents' financial mismanagement or their financial misconduct in a marriage in community of property. So yeah, so openness and transparency is very, very important. Very important. Parties always need to be mindful in all that they're transacting, that behind this, I am married in community of property.
Esther, you know all of these regimes. Surprisingly, you chose in community of property. And you are the breadwinner. So let's share that, because from my experience, when men are not the breadwinner or they earn less than the wife, they have low self-worth. They don't feel that they're good enough. They don't feel that they place value on money, and they don't know that actually women are not placing value on money. They are. Women want love and attention. Tell me about your choices as an advocate.
So Yes, Dr. Saunders. I personally am married in community of property. I am breadwinner presently, and it is being self-employed. It is a variable income. I also mentioned when I introduced myself that I was married previously, and quite interestingly, I was also married in community of property previously. And when my husband and I married, um, for me it was a community of property, and I think for me, despite having knowledge of the law and the marital regimes and the advantages and disadvantages and um, the pros and the cons of and the consequences in the event there's a divorce. I think I was more informed, perhaps more than my husband, because this was his first marriage. I was more informed, I think, from a cultural perspective. You know, we always grew up with our parents, our uncles, our aunts, like everybody, you know. Therefore, we often say,
What's your culture and what's your husband's culture?
So I'm Indian, and then my husband is Sutu.
Okay, so there's the intercultural and blended and
Yes, yes.
you got the whole list.
So I think for me, just culturally growing up, that's what informed my marriage in community of property. I'm going to be honest to say, perhaps in hindsight, I would have advised, I would have gone with a marriage out of community of property, excluding, I beg your pardon, including the accrual system. So out of community of property with the accrual.
Because of your practice, because of your business?
I think, from an asset point of view, I think when it comes to liabilities and things like that, spouses do take their respective responsibility on that. But in a marriage, I beg your pardon, out of community of property with accrual, there's still some comfort, there's still some security for both spouses, depending on how big spouses are able to, or how large they're able to accumulate their assets. There's still a benefit in that sharing, so you eliminate some of the risks and the consequences of a marriage in community of property, but at the same time you do have some of that security and some of that benefits that a marriage in community of property. I just think it's a more balanced marital regime. So in hindsight, I believe now I should have gone that route. But fortunately, it hasn't prejudiced me to date. So it's quite personal.
Yeah.
Marriage systems, parties can be informed by various factors, but they can be informed by various factors.
A lot of men don't know how the women might feel about them not being the breadwinner. And I've done many talks on that. And when I say, this is how women feel if you're not the breadwinner, how do you feel? Because you told me that your husband has so many qualities. It really outshines the finances, and that's what you need, because you have finances. Talk about that.
So, in our marriage, my husband is an ordained pastor, and sometimes he gets some ministry appointments, and there'll be a stipend here or a stipend there. So, it's not, unfortunately, in this season or for many seasons, but at this point in our lives, it's not something that is really dependable or we can depend on. And for the better part, it's really excluded from our budget. So, presently and financially, I am the breadwinner on a variable income, being self-employed, and it really has. I've had to grow into, Dr. Saunders, appreciating the qualities of my husband. You almost put them on scales, so to speak, and you apportion, the good or the bad, the good and the ugly, and several times I have found the qualities, his good qualities, have far outshined the fact that he's just not able to contribute financially or make a difference financially at this point in time. Sometimes my job often keeps me late at the offices, and he's the one that is there emotionally and physically sustaining the house, and the children. At times I'm leaving early to Pretoria. Sometimes like even today I'm here, for instance, and both the children are at home with him. So he really is, and he's such an immense moral, spiritual support, moral support, mental support. And that really does. Finances are important. As I mentioned, let's not pretend, without
Yeah.
finances, none of us can really do anything. But, one really has to look at the bigger picture. And it's so important, if we are going to be successful in our marriages, we need to look at the bigger picture. And as I mentioned, all that he does, his support. Sometimes I do a lot of, I'm quite involved in pro bono work, and sometimes it comes on a weekend or something that I'm engaged. He just unconditionally supports me, and so I'm even gonna attribute a lot of my success or my progressive success to him. I can't not separate him from my successes. And I think that is such a big thing, particularly, well, with all types of marriages, but particularly in marriages, in community of property. I think this is something spouses, we can so easily take for granted that we just married in community of property. But your successes, you have to be mindful the role that your spouse plays in that promotion or in that increase or in that achievement. Sometimes, there are times when there are some late nights sometimes, with researching or type of case that you're working in, and it just unconditionally supports me. I know, even as I was preparing for my interview, as I mentioned earlier, he asked me, "Can I get you anything?" And it's those little things that really, really go a long way. It really goes a long way.
And I wish, husbands would understand that you didn't plan not to be a breadwinner. You didn't plan to have less money or than your wife. That wasn't the plan. Obviously, you are very ambitious and you want to earn more and you want to provide. But accept the reality of today. Today, women have better opportunities than men. Accept the reality. Sit as husband and wife and say, these are my circumstances. This is your circumstances. How can we do life together? And work on that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Elsie Mokoena, for coming. I really appreciate
I want to
your
cover
time.
one thing,
Of
Dr.
course,
Saunders,
please.
very importantly, and we're seeing this increasingly now in our courts. Whilst it's all novel what marriages out of community of property, excluding accrual, intended to cater for, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, even if we divorce, we go our separate ways. Again, without any gender bias, but many women, particularly in our Western cultures, they married out of community of property, excluding the accrual. And yes, the intention might have been that the husband's going to set up a business, and in the event things don't go well, then the wife is protected. We find many wives have given up their careers, they've given up their callings, they've given up their jobs, many professional women, and they then bring up the children. They've not been able to have an estate of their own. They've not been able to build up their estate within this marital regime because of the sacrifices that they made, and which their husbands were okay with, and some of them even did it at the instance of their husbands. And when the parties go through a divorce, then the husband wants to argue that we're married out of community of property, excluding accrual. And courts have obviously seen that. And so it's not at all uncommon. You find women now involved in legal actions in these types of marital regimes in divorce circumstances, asking the court for his estate to be redistributed. And so there's something called a redistribution agreement, but it's a common battle in our courts of law increasingly, because the woman is often now in her 50s, in her 60s. And yes, you might be wondering, are people getting divorced are we seeing many divorces, people in their 50s, people in their 60s?
Yes,
increasingly
yes.
so. And so a husband cannot, simply can't just escape now, this type of marital regime and say, sorry, we are married out of community or property, excluding. He can be ordered, to the extent a wife can prove at least on a balance of probabilities how much she has contributed or led him to helped him rather to build his estate. She can seek a contribution. She can seek some sort of a compensation in that regard. So we are seeing a lot of these redistribution agreements in these types of marriages when parties are getting divorced. If they're not able to agree on a redistribution agreement, then the court will grant an order for redistribution, as the wife has proven the extent by which she has helped to enlarge her husband's estate.
So she still has a chance.
Yeah, very much so.
Recovering.
Very much so.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've learned so much. It was wonderful. Thank you so much. And yes, viewers, thank you for listening, and I hope this has been very helpful. Thank you.